Hello and welcome to the virtual tour of North and Central Jefferson County. My name is Mindy Hudson and I am head of the Genealogy Department of the Jefferson County Library at the Northwest Branch located in High Ridge, Missouri. This year, 2021, we are celebrating the Bicentennial of Missouri becoming a state. As part of an ongoing effort to showcase the beauty and the history of the state, several of the counties throughout the state have joined together to present programs, hold contests, given lectures and tours, and other activities. If you're interested in finding out more about that, you may visit their website at missouri2021.org. Jefferson County Library has teamed up with the Jefferson County Genealogical Society and several other local historical societies to bring a virtual tour of some of the most historical and interesting places in our county. We hope that you enjoy this virtual tour, even though it does not cover the entire county by any means. There is so much more than what we could present to you, but we hope that you enjoy what we do have to show you. There were a few requirements that were essential for the success of early settlements. One was that it had to be easy for transportation, such as roads and waterways, and eventually the railroad. Two, it needed to have access to water for human consumption, animal consumption, and also the growing of crops. And third, it needed land that could produce those crops and resources that would sustain families and game for food. Come along with us as we take a journey through the north and central sections of Jefferson County. Let's begin our journey at High Ridge, Missouri. It wasn't near the railroad. Big River didn't flow through it. The land wasn't really suitable for farming either. By all the criteria that normally drew early settlers to a particular area, High Ridge should not have prospered, but yet it did. The building of Old Gravelway Road was its salvation. As early as 1856, James Scott ran a post office out of what was probably a store or saloon in that area. Between June 1860 and May 1861, the name of the settlement was changed to Tallow Hill, but quickly reverted back to its original name. However, despite claims that the town was located at the highest point in Jefferson County at 970 feet above sea level, it misses the mark of highest point by about 5 feet. A hill on Tower Road and Highway 21 has that distinction. In 1867, a road of crushed rock, known as macadamized, was laid between Hillsborough and Fenton, running through High Ridge, opening the way for travelers and merchants alike. Soon, more businesses sprang up along the main street, now called High Ridge Boulevard, and the population began a steady growth, particularly among German immigrants. St. Martin Evangelical Church was founded by the High Ridge German Protestants, headed by Martin Hauser in 1868. According to an article in the winter 1985 edition of Reflections, 40 acres of land was purchased from Sarah Bowley, and each church member was asked to contribute 2 logs toward the building project. In 1887, the log building was covered over with siding, and a vestibule and bell tower were added. Unfortunately, lightning struck the tower in 1910 and caused a fire that eventually destroyed the building, despite the fact that Henry Delbruck rang the bell as long as he could. The remnants of the melted bell are located in the library's archives. The present brick building was completed in 1930. with the Educational Building addition in 1965. The surrounding acreage has been used as the burial ground for generations of local residents for more than a century and a half. As the Irish, German, and Czech-Slavic immigrant population grew in the county, the need for easier access to religious facilities also became evident. In the early 1900s, there were 3 Catholic congregations in the northwest section of the county, one in Burnsville, one in House Springs, and the other in Rock Creek. In times of inclement weather, the travel conditions made attending Mass challenging for the residents of High Ridge. In May 1921, around a dozen or so families approached Reverend John Whipperman of St. John's in Rock Creek, asking about the feasibility of establishing a Catholic church in High Ridge. The request was met with enthusiasm by Father Whipperman and by Archbishop Glennon. The original meeting house was a former feed store which stood across from the Brockman store. Franciscan monks brought a statue of St. Anthony from the church of the same name in St. Louis, and the new mission was dubbed St. Anthony's at High Ridge. According to the booklet published for the Silver Jubilee in 1946, the occasion of the first service was announced by 3 blasts from a shotgun fired by Henry Remy Sr., since a proper bell was lacking. By 1928, the cornerstone of the present church building was laid, and the dedication service was held there on May 19, 1929. The parochial school was built and began instruction to students in the fall of 1949. In its earliest days, High Ridge boasted several businesses and stores, but among its most popular were the Brockman Store and Hotel, where people gathered to get their mail, to buy their groceries, or salesmen known as drummers would come to stay on their trips to and from the area. Werner's store, built by Christian Werner Jr. about 1910 at the corner of High Ridge Boulevard and Antire Road. Although not the first store on the boulevard, it became a place where local men gathered around the old pot-bellied stove on cold winter days, talking politics, farming, and world events. In addition to the general merchandise, groceries, dry goods, and ice cream that could be purchased there, the store was also used as the local post office. Fortunately, this building is still standing and now houses the North Jefferson Fraternal Order of Eagles. Heading northeast from High Ridge is the Bohemian settlement of Rock Creek. The community consisted mainly of farmers who longed to hold on to their Catholic traditions. The Bohemian settlement of Rock Creek got its name from the creek that flows through the valley south of Murphy off Highway 30. The pioneer settlers had originally come from the embattled area of Bohemia, a region in Central Europe occupying the western 2/3 of the modern Czech Republic. Many of the earliest immigrants were fleeing the political uprisings of the Revolution of 1848 and the unstable years following. Settling first in St. Louis in the Soulard area in what was called Bohemian Hill, the impoverished immigrants lived in boarding houses, taking whatever work they could find in order to save enough money to move out to the rural areas where they could farm. Those who desired to cling to their Catholic faith helped to establish the first Czech Catholic Church in America, a small wooden church called St. John Nepomuk, in 1854. Still, the dream of farming their own land drew many of the settlers out of the city and to communities such as Rock Creek in Jefferson County. By 1859, St. John Catholic Church was established, and a log building was erected. Father Brockhagen included St. John in his ministerial area. Sometime between 1869 and 1872, the parish school was built and local children began receiving instruction. Operation of the school was sporadic until 1880, when Father Matuchik reopened it with an enrollment of 40 students. The original building became unusable over time, so in 1909 a new two-story building was erected by the parishioners. Following World War II, the decision was made to move the parish to a new location closer to Maxville, which is modern-day Arnold Imperial. The former school now serves as a private residence. To the right of the old school building are 3 cemeteries. The old St. John Catholic Church Cemetery, which is also known as the Rock Creek Cemetery, the Czech-Slovakian Benevolent Society Cemetery, also known as the Bohemian Cemetery or the CSPS Cemetery, and the newer St. John Cemetery. A post office was located in Rock Creek for a short time, but was discontinued and service moved to High Ridge. The Rock Creek or Light School served the local children for many years, and the Light Store opened until the early 1950s. Hard working and hard playing, the locals often gathered in warehouses, barns, and stores for dances and parties. During Prohibition, bootleg whiskey supplemented the meager farming income. Those who were not brewing the moonshine were paid up to $250 to hide sugar and yeast in their cisterns. Descendants of these hardy pioneer settlers can still be found in Jefferson County even today. Traveling southeast from Rock Creek is the location of House Springs. Goodspeed's history, originally published in 1888, tells us that James Head was the earliest known white inhabitant of the area, which would eventually become House Springs. About 1790, he settled at a site where a flowing stream was strong enough to, quote, turn a mill wheel, unquote. The creek, a tributary of Big River, was known as Negro Fork at the Merrimack River in those days, but later became Heads Creek. At the time, attacks on settlers by the native Osage became more frequent and violent, causing Mr. Head to abandon his log house and move back to a more secure location. Nevertheless, it didn't take long before the family of Adam House took up residence there. House was a widower with at least 6 children. 2 of his daughters were married and out of the household in March 1800, when a band of Osage returning from a hunting expedition arrived asking to use 2 horses that belonged to Mr. House. Although he declined the request, the natives helped themselves to the animals. Angered over the audacity, Mr. House followed them to St. Louis, where he called for their arrest. Thinking he had made his point, Mr. House went home and continued his daily routine. Evidence indicated that he was outside making maple sugar 2 days later, when several Osage returned and laid siege to the house. Adam House quickly led his 4 children, Betsy, Mary, John, and Jacob, who were between the ages of 9 to 20, inside. The siege lasted 2 days, during which time a rainstorm enabled the girls to escape toward Fenton in hopes of summoning help. On the 2nd day, running out of ammunition, Adam made the desperate decision to send his son John, age 14, through the fray toward Kimmswick. John was seriously wounded, but made it to his destination. Even so, by the time reinforcements arrived, it was too late. The scalped and decapitated bodies of Adam House and his youngest son were found outside the ransacked dwelling. Militia, under the command of Pierre de Target, buried the bodies of father and son on the property. A week later, the surviving children were placed under the guardianship of Robert Owen, stepfather of David Hildebrand, whose own father, Peter, had been killed a few years earlier by the Osage. Following the attack, many of the residents of the area fled to more populated places until the threat of Indian attacks began to fade. In 1810, the heirs of Adam House sold the property to William Russell. There is an original depiction of the House Springs Massacre by the late Eric Huff on display in the genealogy department. Years later, the property came into the possession of the Burgess family, who built a beautiful 2-story home along with a barn and several other outbuildings. The beautiful spring, which gave the area its name, was a lovely focal point to the property. Eventually, the property was purchased by the Weber family and remained as a private dwelling until plans to widen Highway MM threatened to encompass the historic landmark. Despite a valiant fight by the Northwest Historical and Preservation Society of Jefferson County, the house was demolished and the spring was all but dried up. Today, there is an ongoing effort to reclaim at least a remnant of the spring, which is located within at the corner of MM and Highway 30, where several fast food restaurants and businesses are now located. The land that Adam House settled included modern-day Main Street in House Springs. This included Spanish Land Grant number 666. In 1837, Cornelius Demery moved from Kentucky and married Delphine Keepers. He built a log house for his bride and raised 3 daughters there. Demery built several additional buildings on the property, and when he died in 1857, Patrick Byrne and Dr. George Smith subdivided the land and tried to market it as, quote, the town of Demery. Located on Main Street in House Springs was this building that was built according to Della Lang in her book On the Road to History about 1871. In 1894, the property was bought by Valentine Light and was expanded to include a hotel, a general store, and a post office where people gathered in the House Springs area. If you'll notice, at the front of the store, there is a small tree. Pay attention to that tree. As you can see, as of 2021, the tree is still standing and has grown quite a bit. The house is also standing. It has gone through quite a number of changes over the years and is basically abandoned. At one point, it was known as the Garden of Eva and was a place where people could buy antiques and unusual items. The building still stands, but it is in disrepair at this point. And it's such a treasure, it would be a shame to lose it, as we have so many other buildings. Across the street, we find the Red Brick Saloon, also known as Votal's Saloon. This structure was finished about 1875, according to Della Lang's book, and had housed a saloon, a dance hall, and in the back there was an ice house. This building is also still standing. The red brick that was used to construct this building was also used to construct the Burgess home just down the road. It was locally made and has withstood the test of time. It now houses a novelty comic book store with other novelty gifts, but the inside, if you go in to look at it, you can still see where the bar was located, where farmers after a long day would come in and visit with their friends and talk and just relax. Just a little piece of history that's still there. Just a short distance from the red brick saloon is a limestone block building, which was the House Springs Bank. Henry Weber in 1924 was the banker when late at night, a November evening, he heard glass breaking and realized someone was robbing the bank. He wanted to go out and confront the robbers, but his wife, fearing for his life, begged him not to go. The commotion inside the house, which was next door, scared the robbers off, who managed to make off with $2,000. The local newspaper claimed that the vault was new and could not be broken into. Well, apparently that piqued the curiosity of some more bandits who 2 weeks later came in the daytime, held a gun to Mr. Weber, and demanded that he open the vault. They made off with $200 more than the first robbers did. This building is still standing today and houses a business called the Dragon Lair. The house that Henry Weber and his family lived in was right next door to the bank, as you can see in this photograph. It was originally the log house that was built by Cornelius Demery. Over time, the logs were covered with lap siding, which was the fashion of the day, and additional rooms were also constructed. As time passed and the siding began to fall from the house, the original logs could be seen underneath the siding that had been added. There were several attempts by people to try to save the house, but it was determined that the logs were in too bad a shape and could not be saved. Sadly, in 2017, the entire structure was demolished. The log home, hidden under the siding for more than 175 years, once again saw daylight for a short time, and then it was no more. By the early 1900s, the Catholic population of the Merrimack Township, which was the northwestern part of Jefferson County, had grown so that the parishioners felt there needed to be another Catholic church available for its members. In 1905, St. Columbkill helped form a mission church in House Springs named St. Philomena. In 1959, the two churches, St. Columbkill and St. Philomena, were merged together to form Our Lady Queen of Peace, but the cemetery still serves the residents of House Springs, and along its walkway you can see the Stations of the Cross. A little further southwest, we come to the settlement of Burnsville. The Big River provided the major draw to this settlement. The town got its name from the family of Patrick Byrne, who was born in Ireland about 1820 but came to America by 1842. Although there were other pioneer families in the Big River area prior to Burns' arrival, it was the combination of the mill and the general store run by the Burns that earned the name. It is interesting to note that just a short distance east is another settlement known as Morse Mill, which was also settled by an Irishman of the name of Patrick Byrne. But these men had no known relationship, and these were two completely different communities. The mill was probably originally built by David Manchester, an Englishman, which is evidenced by the type of architecture used in the construction of the facility. The date of origin is unknown, but may have been around 1836. The next owner was David Yerke, but it is mostly associated with Patrick Byrne family, who bought the mill in 1867. It was run by Patrick Byrne until his death in 1872, at which time his son Michael F. Byrne took over. In addition to the mill, the Byrnes operated a general store and post office, giving the settlement the name of Burnsville. Charles Steidle owned the mill from 1921 until failing health caused him to close it in 1933. In the 1970s, Jim and Jeannie Lulamandier bought the Burnsville mill and renovated it into a private residence, keeping as much of the original charm as possible. Periodically, they open the grounds for special occasions such as weddings or community events. This is one of the only two original mills still standing in the county. The Burnsville Bridge over the Big River leading to Burnsville was possibly built under the direction of John Morse, who also built the Morse Mill Bridge. Both were possibly built sometime in the 1860s. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the river served as a popular recreation area for hot summer days and saw the transition of horse traffic to the automobile. Today, the bridge is not safe for heavy machines, but still serves as a link for foot traffic from the mill property to a picnic area across the river. St. Columkill Catholic Church was originally built around 1845 as a mission church. The log structure was located on Burnsville Road west of Burnsville Settlement. In 1867, it was replaced by a brick building, but was so poorly constructed that it had to be replaced a short time later by a frame church. Many of the earliest settlers of Burnsville, Cedar Hill, Chevy, Local, and House Springs attended this church and are interred in the graveyard. The church was demolished in 1961 when St. Columkill and its mission church St. Philomena were merged, becoming Our Lady Queen of Peace Catholic Church, which is located on Highway 30 between Cedar Hill and House Springs. As we travel south down Highway 30, we'll turn left onto Highway B. We come to the little settlement called Morse Mill. The community of Morse Mill got its name from John H. Morse, a farmer and miller who came to the Jefferson County area in 1847 from Massachusetts. He built a one-room dwelling in the 1850s overlooking the Big River, which served as his home. No stranger to controversy,
Morse was described in the Jefferson Democrat as a man with a, quote, short neck, round head, stoop-shouldered, sharp tongue, shockingly profane, the master of rough, homely wit, end quote. At the close of the Civil War, emotions and tempers ran red hot, especially in the political arena. During the spring and summer of 1866, the local newspaper ran a series of articles chronicling the bitter political feud between Morse and Judge Newcomb. Morse went on to serve a term in the state senate and ran numerous times as a congressional candidate. He was best known as a road and bridge contractor, a holder of valuable real estate, and a grist mill and county store operator. In 1870s, Morse added a back section to his home, built by freed slaves who camped on the hill near the old mansion. After the death of John H. Morse in 1891, much of the family assets were sold. In 1908, the mill was owned by W. R. Williams, who updated the machinery and continued operation for a time. By the summer of 1914, a tavern was included in the mansion, and citizens came from as far away as St. Louis to cool off in the river and enjoy fried chicken dinners. In the 1920s, Morse's renovated house was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Fred Williams and became known as the Riverview Hotel, but was more commonly known as the Morse Mill Hotel. In its heyday, the Morse Mill Hotel boasted such well-known guests as Charles Lindbergh, Clara Bow, and Charlie Chaplin. In the Prohibition years, it was even alleged that Al Capone and his gang made regular visits to the resort. In later years, lake resorts such as Lake of the Ozarks and modern highways that bypassed the smaller river resort towns sounded the death knell for growth in Morse Mill. The mill and hotel lost their prominence in the community and were eventually closed down. The mansion and store reverted to private homes for many years, eventually housing a home for troubled youth. Recently, the property was renovated and open to the public for tours. At present, the historic house and lands are for sale. Continuing east on Highway B, we go a short distance and arrive at Hillsborough, which is the county seat. The site for what would become the town of Hillsborough was chosen because of a natural spring which was located at a place known in the 1830s as Horan's Fork, along the old coach road. At that time, the road roughly followed Old Highway 21 and turned west where Highway BB is today, and then south on Elm Street. Stagecoaches running between St. Louis and Potosi stopped at the spring to water their horses, while the passengers rested at Mr. Henson's coach stop. According to an article in the Jefferson Democrat, water from the big spring formed a pool at the foot of two large trees on the hillside. Once the county seat was moved from Herculaneum to Hillsborough in 1840, a concrete trough was built to collect the water. Although the location of the county seat at Hillsborough is more centralized to the county, the railroad never ran through it. Residents needing to do business there had to take the train to nearby Victoria and then hire a horse and buggy to complete their journey. Hotels, taverns, and general stores sprang up along the main street to accommodate the needs of local or out-of-town visitors. Many of the original buildings still stand and have been repurposed to house law offices or other modern businesses. According to various sources, no courthouse was ever built in Herculaneum when the county seat was located there. It wasn't until the seat of government was moved to Hillsborough in 1840 that money was set aside to build the structure. Original plans were to build the facility from logs on Lot 5 of Mary and O'Neill's block, but the final decision was made to erect a 25-foot square building of brick or stone. Marie Walker wrote in the Hillsborough Sesquicentennial 1839 to 1889 that first occupancy of the courthouse appears to be in April 1840, and the courthouse was used from 1840 to 1865. The original building was used afterwards as a school building for a time. The second courthouse was built on lots 44 through 51 from Merriman's block. Rooms were added for office space and record keeping. The jail was located at the rear of the building with living quarters for the sheriff on the top floor above the prisoner cells. Although there have been a few more additions and renovations to the building, it is still easy to see the original building today. As the town grew and modern buildings sprung up, the pool has disappeared, and the spring has dwindled into little more than a trickle which runs through a culvert under Elm Street. Still, this one little feature was responsible for the birth of a town, the seat of Jefferson County government. It forms the headwaters of Ballew's Creek and then joins Big River at Cedar Hill. Quite impressive for something which is only marked by a fading wooden sign. Two other places of interest in Hillsborough are the Governor Fletcher home and the Husky family cabin. The Husky family came to Missouri about 1803, and their family still owns land near Hillsborough. This little cabin was home to the original Husky family where many of the children were raised. The cabin sat on the property, the Husky family property, but has since been moved into Hillsborough and reconstructed so that visitors can see what a pioneer cabin would have looked like. Governor Fletcher was the first native-born Missouri governor, and his home has been restored and is open for tours periodically. Traveling back northeast to Goldman, we come to the Sandy Creek Bridge over the Lemay Ferry Road. Built about 1872, this is one of only 4 covered bridges remaining in Missouri. Today, the restored bridge is maintained by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources and is a popular spot for wedding, prom, and senior photographs. This photograph of the bridge was given to us courtesy of Jacqueline Toole. Continuing northward, we come to the little community of Cedar Hill, Missouri. Cedar Hill is another example of a community evolving due to the resources of the Big River. John and Peter Hildebrand are considered the first white settlers of the county, receiving Spanish land grants prior to 1770. Jonathan's grant encompassed the land on the east side of the river where the mill is presently located, and Peter was granted the land on the west side where the park is situated. Settling in the wilderness did not come without its perils. Peter Hildebrand was away from his homestead hunting when he was attacked and killed by Indians. For a time, the few local pioneers fled to St. Louis, where they were better protected. Covered bridges were popular for the protection from weather and the aid they gave to horses that were hesitant to cross over swirling waters below. Originally called the Maddox Mill Bridge, it really had nothing to do with Mr. Maddox, as he was no longer a resident in the early 1870s when the bridge was constructed. Most people referred to it as the Red Bridge because the covering was painted red. Nevertheless, by 1907, the constant flooding made the original bridge unsafe, and a new iron bridge, minus the cover, replaced it. In the 1980s, a more modern concrete structure was built to handle the heavier traffic of today. In 1847, Thomas Maddox petitioned the court to grant him a portion of the land belonging to Jonathan Hildebrand to build a dam across the river, where he intended to build a mill. He was met with opposition by Duguid Pitzer, who lived a short distance up the river. Pitzer feared that the dam would cause flooding, but Maddox won the suit and built the mill. The small settlement became known as Maddox Mill, but the name didn't stick. At one point, there was a push to name the town Enterprise, but that also was abandoned. There were a series of owners throughout the following years, but it was Mr. Lewis B. Rediker who took over operation of the mill from the late 1890s through the 1930s and added an ice house that is the most memorable of the millers. The name of the town and the mill became generically known as Cedar Hill. Today, the 174-year-old mill is in need of repair. Owned by the Lulamdier family, it is one of the two remaining original mills in Jefferson County. Rounding out our journey, we come back to High Ridge, and we will tell a little bit about the history of the community library. The concept for a community library in High Ridge began in the spring of 1978 with a group of 12 ladies, including Dr. Jean Jose, Anna Bruvard, Jackie Deal, Trudy Garrett, Jackie Korn, Ella Lancaster, Della Lang, Jackie McLean, Charlotte Mason, Sandy Mincher, Betty Stoll, Dolores Yarborough. The original library was located in a tiny building on High Ridge Boulevard owned by local businessman Larry Algren and was run by volunteers. Members paid a small fee to offset library operating expenses, but books were obtained from donations. The library officially opened July 7, 1978. However, it quickly became apparent the facility was too small. Fortunately, the committee was able to locate a more spacious building nearby in the Coleman Building. For several years, operating expenses were raised by the tireless efforts of volunteers who held bake sales, bazaars, raffles, and other fundraisers to bring in whatever revenue they could. Nevertheless, money was always a concern. In April 1982, the first of several elections was held to ask for tax-supported libraries countywide. Unfortunately, although there was tremendous support in the northern communities, the southern half consistently voted the proposal down. After several years of disappointing defeats, volunteers asked the General Assembly to pass a law allowing libraries to divide into subdistricts like other service entities such as fire or water and sewer districts. The law passed, but in the wake of that victory, disaster struck. On March 29, 1987, the Coleman building that housed the library burned. All the progress that had been made over the past 9 years was wiped out. But these dedicated souls just started over again. Nevertheless, the group of volunteers located a new space in the lower section of the High Ridge Shopping Center. With the help of the whole community, they were able to slowly rebuild. The library reopened June 6, 1987, eventually moving from the lower to the upper level of the building. Finally, in November 1989, the redrawn district boundaries reflected the Northwest School District, and the tax-supported proposition passed. In May 1990, Martha Maxwell was hired as the first library director of the Jefferson County Library. Jefferson County Library District was established by the Jefferson County Commission on November 23, 1981, when the 3 judges of the county court appointed 5 citizens to the Jefferson County Library Board of Trustees. The first board included Martha Dodson of Crystal City, Della Lang of High Ridge, Robert Miller of Hillsborough, Elizabeth Mueller of DeSoto, and Ralph Sipple of Arnold. The library did not begin operations, however, until 1989, when voters in the Northwest and Fox-Windsor library subdistricts approved a 20-cent tax levy to support library services in these subdistricts. In June 1991, 2 branches, Northwest in High Ridge and Fox Arnold in Arnold, were opened in rented quarters, in a storefront in High Ridge Plaza and in the lower level of the Arnold City Hall. A small bookmobile also provided service. In June 1998, the newly constructed Windsor branch, the first district-owned building, opened on Metropolitan Boulevard in Barnhart. During 2003, construction began on a new Arnold branch library. In 2005, an article appeared in a local newspaper stating that bids were being accepted to turn a 20-year-old dilapidated building into a, quote, structure that's got some civic presence, end quote. This former grocery store was slated to become the new home of the Northwest branch of Jefferson County Library. Modeled after the popular bookstores such as Barnes & Noble, this library included a coffee shop, separate areas for children's activities, as well as a genealogy department. On Sunday, October 30, 2005, the ribbon-cutting ceremony marked a new era in a long journey that began 27 years before. The Della Lang Local History and Genealogy Room at the Northwest Branch in High Ridge offers services for local and worldwide genealogy research, free genealogy classes, access to several valuable genealogical databases, and a growing collection of reference materials are available for the beginning genealogist as well as the advanced researcher. Each branch library has its own dedicated Friends of the Library organization, with volunteers promoting the library and raising funds to support programs and special needs at each branch. The Jefferson County Genealogical Society also supports the Jefferson County Library Genealogy and Local History Collection. They meet at the Jefferson County Library Northwest Branch on the 3rd Saturday of each month. We hope that you have enjoyed this tour. Click on some of the other links to find out more about Jefferson County and its historical places. Thanks!